know a few other people are going to be trickling later on. Okay, cool. Welcome. This is part 1 of our Tournament Masterclass series on so today is going to be Preflop fundamentals. Just quick, I don't think anybody here came to the last time I did the Preflop thing. Maybe, I don't know. None of you guys. Okay, so that's good. Because then there's a bit of stuff I took from that one, so this should be mostly new to all of you guys. But just, have you guys been generally coming out to the Mastery Mondays? Yes? Some of them? Okay, just trying to get a sense. You came to, okay, this is your second one?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, nice. So that's good, so it'll get a good mix of, some of you guys have seen a bunch of stuff, some of you, maybe this is relatively new, but this is gonna be really helpful regardless of whether you've seen a bunch or not. So what we're gonna cover today is kind of 3 main things, which is bet sizing basics, pre-flop range heuristics. So what I mean by this is, instead of just like inundating you guys with like a bunch of charts, it's just really thinking about like what are the general heuristics to keep in mind when you want to widen or tighten your range. And then lastly is like more anecdotally what I see that the population generally makes a lot of mistakes on, and where you guys can start to deviate a bit, or at least watch out for, especially if you're playing today, and think about how you might want to exploit certain players based on some of these population mistakes. Yeah, so we'll jump into that. So first question that I always like to start, just generally whenever I talk about preflop at all, but what do you guys think is the goal of a preflop raise? So like raising preflop, what do you think you're trying to do usually, or what's your incentive when you want to like raise with a hand preflop?
Start building the pot.
Start building a pot. So for value, when you have a good hand, you want to charge people more. Yep.
Just take down all the dead money that's out there.
Yeah, take down dead money. For sure. There's usually gonna be the blinds, and then sometimes you're gonna 3-bet and also steal like 4.5 bigs, which is quite meaningful.
Get information about the players that's going into the flop.
Yes. So yes, being able to narrow people's ranges. So when somebody's calling your preflop raise versus if they're just like limping in, they might have a super wide range. So when somebody calls, you can at least put them maybe on like the top 25 or 20% of hands depending on what position they're in. So it gives you a better idea of what they have, so you know how to play with them post-flop. So yeah, that's pretty good. I would say one is really also getting as many people out of the hand as possible, and we'll cover why this is really important in a bit. But generally speaking, you guys probably just feel it in general, is like when you play multi-way pots, it becomes sometimes really confusing, or you run into coolers maybe more often because ranges are so wide and people kind of have all these different combinations of 2 pairs or trips. So generally speaking, you don't necessarily want to go multi-way. Increase the size of the pot, so equity capitalization, going for value, and then narrow the range of possible hands your current opponents are holding. So exactly what you guys said. So now that we know the goal of preflop raise, I'll kind of cover this relatively quickly because I think most folks, but just in case this is new to some folks, in tournaments specifically, you can kind of use like a very basic sort of like chart for what your standard raise sizing is. I still see a few folks make this at like these mistakes at VClub around sizing, especially for preflop raising usually too big, because in cash games you're gonna have like a standard size of like somewhere between 3 to 5x, depending on how sticky and like and call heavy your opponents are. But in tournaments, especially because stacks are shallower, raise sizes overall tend to be smaller. At some point, when it's not in the early stages, basically you're going to see very standard, just 2 to 2.2x big blinds. So you can kind of use this as a general like chart, but when you're in the early stages, you can raise closer to kind of like what you do in cash games, so 2.5 to 3x, as the average stack gets shallower. So on the left side, this is average stack size, but you can also use like your own stack size. Like if you've got like 20 big blinds, like it also makes sense to not really be putting in like 3 big blinds and like risking a significant chunk of your stack. And then generally speaking, when players limp, you're gonna add 1 more big blind to your raise size for each limper. But any questions on this? I imagine this is mostly familiar to most folks here, but yeah, any questions on this? General raise sizing? Okay, cool. So, oops.
You know the answer.
Well then. Imagine you didn't see that, but I guess I kind of gave it away a little bit. But let me ask you this instead. Do you guys think you should ever limp pre-flop?
Yes.
Yes? Why?
If you're gonna limp re-raise with the monster under the gun or from the small blind, that's like
Okay.
maybe one of the only times ever.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe once
Okay.
every 2 tournaments.
For sure. I think the second one for sure, you're gonna have a decent amount of limps from the small blind, 100%. The limp re-raising is actually a strategy you see employed a decent amount, especially in low stakes like live tournaments. We'll talk about that in a bit, but definitely something that you see. Does anybody else think that you should or should not limp pre-flop? Let's take small blind out of the equation from every other position, and you're like it's on your action. I'm seeing some shakes of the
It's
head.
not 100% either way, but
Okay, you think
you
it
probably
depends on
want to
situation.
like maybe 5%.
Okay, so you think
a
some
low-
small percentage of hands.
Small percentage, maybe no situation.
And what are you thinking, like just with your premiums to trap, or are you thinking like some like medium strength hands, or
Medium.
so you
I
think so?
medium.
Okay, so you think medium strength hands. I think John, you were saying more like premiums to kind of like
Premiums.
trap to limp 3-bet.
Yeah, and the only other time I'd really like limp is like when there's high ICM implications,
Mm.
right? Like if I'm trying to like get through the bubble and
Mhm.
my hand's too good to fold, but I don't have enough equity to like do a jam raise with like say 4 big blinds and somebody at the table is 3, but I want to see where it's at, I might limp there.
Would you have 4 big blinds yourself?
Yeah, instead of just jamming. I
Gotcha.
don't know, played like 3 tournaments and I started doing that. And I ended up like getting second in one of them,
Oh,
like
nice.
being able to like carry through, so I found some spots where limping was,
It worked out for you.
It
in those-
worked
in those
out.
moments. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, you were gonna say something?
I mean, specifically, I basically only limp if there's like already a couple limpers and I'm in like late position with something like deuces.
Mm.
So it's like I don't really want to like blow up this pot because if I wanted to open, it would be a pretty big size. So I just kind of like limp along, trying to see a flop with a hand like deuces or like 5-6 suited or something like that.
I love that you said that. We'll cover that scenario in a bit. Cool. Okay, so sounds like you guys define a couple of specific instances where you may limp when you're not in the small blind. So now I'll go to this question, which is like, when should you limp pre-flop? A, B, C, D. I guess I'll give you guys like a few seconds just to read this, and then I'll just ask who thinks each. So yeah, 1, when you have a premium hand, which is kind of what which I was saying. B, when you're short stacked and don't want to risk alcohol at all. Actually, that's exactly also the scenario you're saying. Never limping is bad in poker. D, when you have a marginal hand that doesn't want to put a lot of chips in, which I think what Eileen was saying. So who thinks it's A? No, you're not. This is the one you verbally said, but you don't think so.
I know it's C.
Okay, that's true. Actually, you saw the answer. That gives it away. Okay, then you know what? Since that's been said, well, I'll say what the answer is, and then I'll kind of say why. Sorry that I kind of spoiled this one. And this is not fully correct because yes, you are going to have a lot of limps in the small blind. So specifically when you're not in the small blind, but generally speaking, you do not ever want to be limping. And I'll kind of cover why. And it's related to what the goal of a pre-flop raise is, the very first goal, which was to thin the field. And when you limp, generally speaking, you're almost guaranteed to go multi-way, and your equity when you're playing in multi-way pots just shrinks dramatically. So limping leads to playing multi-way pots. You can't really win EV in multi-way pots. You can get lucky in multi-way pots. I'm not saying you can't win the pot, but generally speaking, you cannot win EV. Your equity capitalization with your premium hands gets dramatically impeded. Your ability to bluff gets dramatically impeded because you've got a 2-card hand playing against like 8 other cards. So chances of you trying to get a bluff through in a multi-way pot is significantly impeded. So generally, when I play multi-way, like I don't really bluff. I dramatically simplify my strategy, right? Like I don't really bluff much unless I've got like the perfect kind of like bluff combo, and I feel like just based on what I know about certain player types that they're gonna be folding a lot, or I've got like a nutted kind of hand and I'm just going for value. Otherwise, you're just trying to get to the river and try not to get cooler. And this equity example just kind of like illustrates that you could have aces playing against like, in this case, 5 other opponents, and you are a 70% underdog to win by showdown, right? Because it doesn't matter what 2 cards you have in your hand. If you're playing against a 10-card hand basically here, and your chances of winning are just incredibly low. So this mathematically illustrates why we really don't want to go multi-way, and why, generally speaking, we really don't want to limp. And I'll cover a bit today how do you adjust against people who do limp, because you are going to see it a lot, especially in low stakes live tournaments, and how to kind of like read into that. But this is why limping is bad. Actually, this is the next slide. How do we respond to limping? What do you guys think? How do we respond to limping? So I think, Will, you kind of covered one scenario where it's like, okay, if you see a bunch of limps in front of you, then, and you've got maybe some like marginal strength hand, then like, you'll be inclined to limp. Where normally if it folded to you, you would have raised or opened with that kind of hand. So you're saying like maybe you're adding a part of your strategy to now include some limps where it normally wouldn't have. So that's one response. What do you guys, any other things that you guys do? Yeah, Leo.
Well, I think, my opinion, I'll just play along, because, the question is to figure out why the person, like they're trying to trap me or something, so I'll play along.
What do you mean by play along? Like you'll limp as well?
I'll just follow wherever he's with, you know? Just
Okay, so you'll basically limp as well. You'll call with what kind of hands? Like your best hands or your medium hands or?
Or let's say I have a decent hand, like a
Yeah.
connected, suited, queen jack.
Sure.
You know, it's not a bad hand, so I'll play along, see what happens.
Okay, so you'll take, yeah, so similar to kind of, well, I guess you'll take some of the hands that, like you want to see a flop with that you probably would have raised with if it
Depends,
folded to you.
if I'm in position or not, right? Also,
Mhm.
is the position advantage. If that person, the lips is the first under the gun or like, you know, out of position, maybe I can decide based on his or her actions, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
So come down to position, or come down to your hand, but like, usually like a medium sort of strength hand that doesn't want to inflate the pot, it sounds like.
It's kind of like a Montreal technique, but that's okay.
Cool.
If we're
Yeah.
trying to thin out the field, I think using bigger sizing instead of using a smaller raise to give them enough equity to call. So you'll be pretty much blowing out the pot, but you're not thinning out the field. And if everybody calls, you're not really achieving any purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I was
So
worried
maybe
about
5x,
I feel like my sizes are too small.
like 5x instead of using 2x.
Yeah, cool.
That one's hard too, depending on your stack size, because then it feels like you're
Exactly.
But I imagine the adjustment there is actually you have to tighten up what you would then 3-bet.
Well, of course, when I would try and thin out, I would be doing it with one of the premium hands.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't be doing with like the 10 jack suited, for example. I
So
mean,
what would you do with 10 jack suited?
with 10 jack suited, either I could min click or I would also be in the same boat.
Or limp.
Lip.
Okay.
You
Cool.
go multi-ways.
So you're splitting your range now to having your large raises, some limps, and then now maybe folding the bottom of what would have been your opening range. Let's say a hand like you would have opened king 10 off if it folded to you on the cutoff, but now maybe you're folding some of those hands. So you're splitting your strategy. Yeah.
I also think it really depends on, obviously position, but who's acting after you. If the chance of you getting squeezed after is high, like if you have aggressive players after you,
Right.
I'll probably be tighter and actually fold. Some hands where I'd be tempted to limp. But realistically, I think from a simplistic standpoint, I would probably just lean 3-bet fold,
Yeah.
so that the chance of me making errors as early on is smaller.
Cool. So reducing your variance. So I love that these answers, because there will be some very valuable takeaways for you guys to implement right away. So what I'll say is, very first thing, most importantly, is fold your trash still. Don't widen your entire range just because somebody else is making a mistake, and don't let it become your mistake. Right? So if it was a hand that you weren't going to V-pick with in the first place, don't just think, oh, it's limper, I get a great price, I get to V-pick now. No, don't do that. I'll say the thing that you guys are describing is, unless you've really studied it, but you're kind of talking about live splitting your strategy and your range into like a raising range, a limping range, and a folding range. And I would bet that like there are scenarios where it exists in solver land where you are gonna potentially have some limps in very specific scenarios. But the people that I've seen do this really well are people who've studied the solvers like intensely and know what the ranges are. Whereas like in the case that you guys are describing, you're kind of doing this live. And I would just say, again, this is kind of an example of somebody making another mistake. And now what's likely gonna happen, you're kind of now freestyling, right? You're freestyling a range construction and you're getting thrown off your game. And that's generally something you want to avoid. So I would highly recommend against splitting your range. If you have a hand that you're gonna open, you should still open it. I would just suggest that you generally don't have a limping range. If somebody else is limping, you should generally not be limping, unless again, you're in the small blind where you are gonna actually have some limps. Still choose the hands that you would have decided to VPip with, that you would decide to raise with, and still raise with them. Choose a larger sizing, so that's what Peter, you said. So yeah, choose a larger sizing, because a lot of times when people do limp, it's with a lot of these like marginal, medium strength hands. So you can heavily exploit them by just making them pay more to see a flop. You're gonna be in position now, and then they're also just gonna fold a lot post-flop. They tend to call way too much pre-flop and then fold too much post-flop. So you can exploit that heavily by just like raising higher pre-flop, continuation bet on a board that favors you post-flop, and then just like take down way more money than you were supposed to. But generally expect to go multi-way. So what this means is I do think it's worthwhile to shed the bottom end of your opening range. And that's mostly gonna come from your offsuit stuff, right? Like if your bottom ace-x open was like an ace-10 off in some formation, then just fold ace-10 off, but maybe still raise ace-jack off. If king-jack off or king-10 off were your bottom, just fold those. Because very likely the original limper is gonna almost always call. They've got a hand like a jack-10 suited or like a low pocket pair or something like that, that they're probably not folding to. And then maybe the big blind's gonna come along as well. So you just want to strengthen your range a little bit to play multi-way and have it be more equity driven. And then this last one is really important because like there are a lot of players, especially in low stakes live tournaments, that do this limp 3-bet strategy. So just pay attention to that, because it also becomes very obvious who the players are that do this. Who are the players that are limping with just like a super wide range, and who are the players specifically limping with like aces, kings, queens, or even, I don't know, ace king or like pocket 10s, pocket 9s with the intention to like 3-bet every time. Like I saw this in a couple of tournaments that I played last, and there's like one guy that like, he had a normal raise size, and then whenever he had a premium, he just always limped. I saw him do it like 3 times over the course of like a couple hours, and then you can just kind of overfold, right? Like just overfold to these, or like if you still got good hands, you can raise, and then they 3-bet, just be very, very cautious. But I tend to notice that like the people who do this, they're not well balanced with their limping range, so just pay attention in that sense. Any questions on this?
I am worried that when we play this tournament, we're all getting the same information. So we're gonna do everything opposite of what we learned today.
Or not.
We'll see how that. That's not what I want to hear, Peter. I would rather all of you guys did this stuff.
I have to give balanced coaching. I have to give some bad advice.
Get some balanced coaching.
Yeah, we
right
know.
there. But I really hope to not see any limpers or multiple limpers behind, unless you're purposely doing it to spite me. But, but we can move on from here.
No.
Okay, well, I guess any other questions about limping before I move on to 3-betting? No. Okay.
I think in like final table, from what I have observed, in final table we observe more limping, right? On a big blind button and maybe small blind.
Same applies even in final table. Like if you're observing limping, it's probably just specific to the players that you're seeing at that final table, that they just have limps in their range, or maybe because the stacks are so shallow at a final table that they're deciding to add limps. But you really shouldn't be seeing limps unless your head's up, like, and they'll have some limps on the button / the small blind. You shouldn't really be seeing limps.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. So we'll move on to 3-betting. So I assume, does everyone know what a 3-bet is? Yes? Okay, cool. Then I'll skip this because this is just illustrating what a 3-bet is. But basically when somebody raises and then somebody later on raises again. So so the primary goal of 3-betting is very, very similar to open raising, but is again about isolation. And it works a lot better than just open raising because one, you're putting more money in the pot. You're typically trying to isolate the original raiser. Everybody else behind you has to be a lot tighter in order to VPip themselves, either by calling or 4-betting. And usually there's not a lot of cold calling 3-bets. So usually you're gonna see people either play back at you with either 4-betting or folding, except with the exception of the original raiser for when it folds back to them. So this is the main goal of 3-betting, and this is kind of your biggest tool, especially pre-flop, And probably generally speaking from a population tendency, like most low stakes live players are not 3-betting enough, both with some of their value hands, but then also with the right combination of bluffs. But really, the most important thing about this is it allows you to get into the most profitable formation in poker, which is being heads up and in position. Like that is where the majority of your win rate is always going to come from poker, and 3-betting is going to be your best tool to get there. So yeah, anyways, that's kind of like the main takeaway. And then we'll talk about kind of like what like 3-betting ranges are and specific scenarios where I think some people are responding very poorly to 3-betting or 3-betting with the kind of the wrong sort of ranges depending on the spots. But this is kind of the main goal of 3-bet and as a really important tool for you. So just really quick on bet sizing for 3-betting, pretty kind of like standard stuff for both in position, out of position. In position usually, so if somebody's opening to 2 big blinds, if you're 3-betting and you're in position, let's say under the gun opens, you're on the button, you have a hand that you want to 3-bet with, you're usually going to make it 6 big blinds. If you're in the small blind, then you're going to make it something like 8 big blinds, and then you'll typically add one or 2 big blinds for every person who called the initial raise. There's exceptions to this, especially when stacks are shallow and ICM implications are high. You're gonna see a lot smaller 3-betting sizes. Like you'll even see as small as like literally like just min click 3-betting. Like so if somebody raises 2 big blinds, you'll see people make it 4 or 4.5 big blinds. So this is all when we were just considering no ICM factors in play and just for chip EV. Any question about 3-betting and 3-bet sizing? Everyone's generally kind of using these sizings with 3-betting.
Should 3-betting's frequency be also dependent on your stack size or no? Yes, somewhat. Like the range of hands that you will choose to 3-bet with, yes, will be dependent on your stack size and the formation, like what's the stack size of your opponent and the people around you, as well as position. So yes, both of those things for sure. And then your stack size will also determine if you have any regular size 3-bets, or in some cases, like when you're sub 20 big blinds, a lot of the time you're just 3-betting all in. So you're just like 3-bet jamming instead of having like a typical like 6 big blind 3-bet as well. So it does dictate sizing. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a technical question. What's a 2-bet? What's a 3-bet?
Yeah, great question. So I'll just kind of go back to this. So like the 2-bet is basically like the first raise. So like the blinds count as like the first bet, basically.
Okay, yeah.
So the first raise is what's like just a raise or an open or a 2-bet, and then it's weird naming, but like and then the next raise after that is a 3-bet, and then 4-bet, 5-bet, 6-bet.
So let's say for example the big blind is 30, right? It's 300, for example.
The big blind, sure, yeah.
And then so the 2-bet would be 600, so on.
The 2-bet would just be what's the name of that person who makes the raise, but they could choose whatever sizing, right? So it doesn't specifically mean that they're making it 2 big blinds. It just means that they're the second person to put in a bet. Like
So the first bet, the big blind is, let's say, 300, right?
Yeah.
So the 2-bet will be double that.
no, it can be any sizing. It's just a matter of the order of the raise. So that's why I know it's
Just
confusing.
1, 2, 3, 4. So it'll be the first bet, second bet, third bet,
Or
fourth
it
bet.
could be any.
But it
any
could be any.
denomination.
It could be any
It could be
It
size.
could be any sizing.
Yeah, it could be any size. It
Yeah,
could
so
be
the 2 and
a
the
1,
3.
2.5, a
Oh.
6, a 10.
I thought it was like 2 double.
No, it doesn't refer to the size. It refers to kind of like the order
I see.
of things. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Oh, that's a good question. I know it can be confusing, especially for folks who are newer to poker. So we've covered limping. We've covered open raising. Oh yes, Sandra.
I had a question about, is there a typical rule of thumb if you're going heads up against like a deep stack, 3-bet size, how should we do it except for this?
You're saying if like you and the like
Short
you,
stack, deep stack, yeah.
if both players are deep stack, like you're very very deep, like let's say 100 big blinds effective. And then your question is there any rule of thumb for sizing?
Yeah.
No, I would say sizing still remains the same. Like, where was my side? Oh, I went too far. Yeah, so I would say sizing remains the same. I would just say like this is like you can use for any stack depth that's like I don't know 30 big blinds plus basically.
Okay.
And then you start to see some smaller sizing once you're getting shallower. But yeah, I would still use these same sizings at like 100 plus big blinds deep.
So what if it was like flipped? I'm on short stack and, you know, the opponent is on really big stack, so.
So I would always pay attention to like what is the effective stack size. So the effective stack size is whoever's the shortest of the two of you guys. So like if you have 30 big blinds and they have 100 big blinds, the effective stack size is 30 big blinds. And in that case, like I would just be I might consider like 3-betting smaller, right? So now you're gonna maybe make it like 5 big blinds instead of like 6 big blinds. Yeah.
I know this was a little bit off topic, but we're on the vein of like, okay, let's say we're in a tournament, we're sitting at 60 bigs, everybody else is 25 bigs. Like we're way ahead. Are we adjusting our range down to 25 big blinds?
Yes.
Or okay.
Absolutely. So you gotta always be thinking about effective stack size. So like if you're on the button, like an extreme scenario, you got 100 big blinds, but the both player in the small blind and the big blind are 10 big blinds. You're not really gonna have like, I mean, you're gonna have some traps like for your open sizing, but you're gonna have also a lot of jams with your like ace X off, your like low pairs, like some of your like king X kind of hands. So you're playing a 10 big blind effective stack, and you're not actually shoving for 100 big blinds, you're shoving for 10. So you're playing as if you are a 10 big blind stack. So that's why in tournaments it's very, very important to pay attention to everyone's stack sizes, because that's gonna shift your strategy, like not just your own stack, but like the players in front of you, what stack size is the person open, what stacks are behind you, are there gonna be hands that are gonna like shove behind you, and like, I take this into consideration a lot, especially if I'm like considering opening from like hijack or cutoff, or even middle position, but there's like a few like 10 to 20 big blind stacks behind me, like I might start to actually tighten my range, because I know there's gonna be just like a lot of, especially if I'm a big stack, like there's gonna be a lot of just like 3-bet jam that I'm just gonna have to fold, so I might just like not even open with some of my like worse like offsuit stuff. Welcome, feel free to grab a seat, there's a bunch of chairs, so yeah, make you pull this one. Cool. Yes.
Do you choose whether or not you want to 3-bet based on the hand value, or just the fact that you kind of want to play that hand? Like say like aces, kings, you're 3-betting, right? But say you want to play like 9-10 suited, are you still 3-betting that way?
It's a good question. This is a great segue into the next section, which is pre-flop ranges. But choosing what hands to 3-bet with comes from studying pre-flop ranges and knowing what the ranges and the shapes of the chart look like, which I know can be very boring at times, and I try not to like, even myself personally, I don't do like a ton of chart study, but I try to know the general shapes. So I'll know like what hands I'm supposed to be 3-betting at like 100% frequency, and those will generally be pretty clear, like a lot of the ones that like, yeah, you know, you have aces, like you're gonna want to put more money in the pot. There's gonna be the hands where you're gonna be mixing with, let's say like suited Broadway kind of hands, or like offsuit Broadway hands, or even like some suited connectors, right? That you're gonna be mixing 3-betting and calling. And when I play live tournaments, as opposed to trying to like dial in a perfect frequency, let's say king queen off, like let's say under the gun opens and I'm like, I don't know, late position, and I'm supposed to like 3-bet 20% of the time with king queen off, and I'm supposed to call like 80% of the time, something like that. I'm not really worried. Like at the highest level, you might see professionals who are like actually randomizing, and then they're like, okay, 1 out of 5 times, and they have like some dial on their watch or whatever. I think what I actually think about at low stakes live tournaments is just more specifically around like the player, and like is this a player that's going to be calling 3-bets way too wide, or are they calling 3-bets like way too tight? Which actually, like a lot of like we'll cover one of these population tendencies, which is like a lot of low stakes live players don't defend against 3-bets wide enough. So who are those people? And this is where you're really paying attention to the table. And like a hand like king queen off that I'm only supposed to 3-bet 20% of the time, if I know this guy's like folding most of his like suited like Broadway stuff and like not really defending wide enough, then I might just 3-bet that 100% of the time. So yeah, it comes with knowing what the shapes and the ranges are, and then knowing which hand classes tend to mix, and then my decision around whether to 3-bet or call with those will be very, very player dependent. Yeah, that's a good question, Billy. Cool. So good segue into pre-flop ranges. Has anyone here like never really looked at a pre-flop range or chart before? A couple folks, okay, that's fine. So you'll get to kind of see what these generally look like and what to watch out for, but it kind of sounds like exactly what's in the name, which is a range of possible hands you will play from a given position. And so this is kind of what solvers will typically do and show you, is kind of like they'll give you a range of hands and kind of dictate like what percentage of hands you want to play and what parts of the chart they come from. So the main things to consider, so these are the general heuristics to keep in mind, is position, stack size, and then that last piece that I just talked about, like, king queen, that's like more the table dynamics, and that's being a little more exploitative. But if we're purely talking about from a theoretical standpoint, really what determines kind of like your range is already driven by like position and stack size. So that being said, what specifically within position and stack size do you guys think are the key heuristics that maybe will drive you to have a wider opening range? So wider, when we say wider, we mean like you're going to be opening with more hands, or a tighter opening range. How do you think, let's just start with position. How do you think position affects your range?
Early tight, late loose, or late wide.
Yeah, early tight and late loose, and do you know why? Or do why do you think
You
that?
just have more information the further you get along towards the button, right? So if, you can see if the early position's gonna raise from the button or anybody else in front of you, whereas if you go in with, let's say, a marginal hand from under the gun, and the button has a monster hand, you're pretty much gonna be folding out your hand, or
Yeah.
you're gonna be in a worse off position. And like you said earlier, most of your money comes from late position, heads up.
Yeah, exactly. So you got more information, and also you get fewer people you have to go through as well. So fewer people who can potentially 3-bet you, and you're gonna, especially on the button, right, is where you're gonna see the widest opening range, because you're always gonna be in position post flop, which is one of those most powerful formations. What do you guys think about stack size? How does that impact our opening ranges? Okay, you think it really fluctuates?
It
Tell me more.
fluctuates a bit. I mean, from what I've seen, right, like 100 big blinds, you're a little bit tighter than you are. 40 big blinds, you go a little bit wider, and then once you get back down to 20, it goes down, and then once you go down to like 5 big blinds, you're open jamming with pretty much any 2 cards from quite a few positions.
Yes, it does fluctuate, but in a slightly different way, maybe in certain formations, but yes, it does certainly fluctuate. It's not as clear.
Would it just be like deeper, wider, generally?
That's the general heuristic at a higher level, but then once you start looking at short stack play, it starts to get wider again, like really short stack, like sub 20 big blinds, but it widens up in a different way. So
Is that like then you're like splitting where it's like an all in and raising?
yeah, so like you're shoving, you start to build a pretty significant shoving range, and then you're doing less calling, generally speaking. You have less you still have some maybe like 3-bet on, not really, you don't really have that many 3-bet on all-ins, so you just start to build a much bigger shoving range, which you're not really gonna have at deeper stack depths. So if we go to position heuristics, so yeah, I think exactly what Johnny said, which is early position is tighter, later position wider. And then stack depth heuristics. Oh, there we go. So when you're deep, like 60 big blind plus, it's generally going to be wider. So, and especially hands like suited connectors and like small pairs gain EV, because you'll have more post flop playability. You get the benefit of implied odds if you hit a straight or a flush, and to try to stack like a hand like aces. When you're sort of in that middle and medium range, you're going to generally start to play tighter than if you were deeper. And then once you get to 20 big blinds and below, it actually starts to widen up a bit, but as I mentioned, a different way, where your flatting range narrows significantly, but your shoving range expands. Your suited connectors go way down in EV, but your hands that contain blockers like ace-x and king-x, and so your small pairs, you still get a ton of value and just have a lot of equity, especially like small pairs if you're jamming on the button with like 15 big blinds. So yeah, so it widens at that shorter stack depth, but it comes from a few different places in the chart.
Quick question on that.
Yes.
I don't understand why ace-x and king-x, your equity goes up based on blockers.
Mm-hmm.
Why do the 5 down through 2 gain so much equity?
So you like your low pairs.
The low pairs, yeah.
Yeah, so it just comes from the fact that even if you get called by ace king, you're still ahead, right? Because a lot of time you're not gonna have much post flop play, but like low pairs sometimes just really suck post flop because you're always gonna have like the fourth pair on the board. It's really hard to realize your equity. But when you jam for like 15, 20 big blinds, and you're not gonna necessarily do this over an initial raise with like a hand like pocket threes, but if it's like late position and it folds to you, and you've got like 15 big blinds, like these are some of your classic shoves is with these low pairs, because even if you get called, you're a slight equity favorite a lot of the time. Sometimes you'll be dominating, like you shove with four, sometimes they call with like ace deuce and you're dominating. So it's just, you're not behind that often and you're doing okay when you get it all in.
So just raise first in plus that fold equity goes into that calculation then, or?
So the raise first it,
Like if you're raising first in with low, like a pocket fours, pocket threes, you wanna be raising first in on those, like that's when you wanna be jamming, you don't wanna be calling a raise or three betting a standard raise.
so specifically when we're talking about short stack play, you're generally not gonna be three bet jamming with the hands like twos through fours. Like especially if it's like an early position open and then you're there in like middle position or late position. But if a late position opens and you're in the small blind, you're actually gonna see a lot of jams with like these low pocket pairs. Cause you get a lot of fold equity, even when called, like you're still doing okay a lot of the time. Like yes, you're dominated when they call with a pair, but the rest of the time you're doing okay. So they just have great kind of like, they have great equity against like a calling range. Yeah. I think, Angad, do you have something?
Yeah, I think it's more about you get to realize your equity with those small pairs. Because if you're deep stack, you might face situations where you're on the flop, you're like maybe in the middle pair, bottom pair, you don't know what to do. But when you're already all in, you're 50% or 40%, how much equity you have, you get to realize all of it.
Okay.
I think that's basically why
Yeah.
these smaller pairs.
You get to see all five cards. You get to realize your full 52 or 53 or 55% equity.
Yeah.
And you get, so whereas like you just have very little equity realization when you're deep, and your main goal when you're playing small pairs when you're deep is like you try to flop a set. Alright, you try to flop a set and like cooler like aces or like overpair or top pair. Whereas when you're short stack, you can just shovel and get your 20 big blinds in and then hope to hold against two overcards.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, so these give you guys some like general heuristics without even like looking at charts, just thinking about like, okay, if I'm later position, like I can go a bit wider. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, Victor, can you comment on the tournament stage? Like, do you believe that you should have a wider range on the bubble? Because you can potentially win more money.
That is largely, so that's when ICM comes into play, and that is largely dependent on your stack size.
Right.
So if you're a big stack, and there's high ICM pressure, like around the bubble or like final table bubble, like you're gonna start widening your range. If you're a middling stack, you're gonna tighten significantly because you're facing the most ICM pressure. You don't want to bust before all these smaller stacks. And then the smaller stacks will also tend to kind of like widen up a bit because they don't really have any ICM pressure. They really want to double up so that they can kind of make the money or make the next play jump. So that's how ICM generally impacts ranges. Yeah. Great question though. Okay, so just to show you, especially for the folks who like kind of haven't seen charts before, but this kind of gives you a bit of a baseline. So even if you just think about like, okay, what kind of hands am I supposed to be opening from under the gun? What percentage of hands is that? And then what is it, basically, I always like to look at it at extremes. So like, what is it under the gun? What is it on the button? And then you can kind of extrapolate a bit like in between. And especially I like to look at the boundaries. So I like to think about what's the worst offsuit ace-x, right? So I know under the gun, generally speaking, like at most stack depths, the worst offsuit ace-x you're gonna open is usually ace-jack off. Like ace-10 off gets in there sometimes, but usually at very low frequency. So like, and I for sure like see some people who are opening hands like ace-9 off or ace-8 off from under the gun. Just know that that's too loose, generally speaking, theory-wise. And like you're just seeing that generally you're not opening a lot of like offsuit stuff, like even some of these offsuit broadways. So I'll just ask first off, like generally speaking, like what percentage of hands do you think you should be opening from under the gun?
I think it's like 11, 12%?
20.
11, 12%, and specifically at 40 big blinds. So, okay, so 11, so somewhere between 10 to 20% is what I'm hearing. Okay, what do you guys think for hijack?
30, 32,
32%? Okay, so 30-ish?
35.
Anyone else think anything differently? Okay, someone agrees at 30? And then what about on the button?
55.
I think it's 45. heuristics?
45,
I think so.
45 to 60. Cool. I mean, you guys are getting the general ballpark is right, and the idea is like, yeah, like you're opening much shallow or much tighter from under the gun versus the button. So we'll kind of look at it. So like specifically under the gun, 40 bigs is like 90%. I think people said somewhere between 10 to 20. So yeah, it's like 90% of hands. This is kind of what the shape generally looks like. Most suited aces. I think a lot of people will miss some of the suited kings. I think that's where you'll see some of the misses. Sometimes like maybe some of the suited gappers. Sometimes people are like opening with too many of the suited connectors. And then yeah, I think a lot of people will open up like a lot of like the offsuit aces that are just too weak to open. Yeah, I think we said like 32% for hijack, so like pretty close, but around 30%, so it's more than, or almost double, no, not double, sorry, it's 50% more hands. And where those are coming from, you'll see as it builds, like as the shapes grow, like a lot of it's coming from more of the suited stuff first, and then you're adding a couple offsuit hands, so now you're basically opening up all the offsuit broadways. But the bulk of it's really coming from the suited region. And then this is what a button opening range looks like. So 50% hands. It's quite a lot of hands. And I think for sure, like beginner, like low stakes regs, I think recs are kind of like missing a lot of these open, especially on the button, like not opening enough with hands like 10-4 suited, 10-5 suited, like a lot of these like suited hands again, like basically any Broadway that's suited, you're gonna be opening on the button, all your ace-x, all these pairs, etc. So this just kind of gives you a general idea. I think the best way is like to study is not just like looking at these charts, but frankly just jumping in like either if you have like GTO Wizard to do like just like the practice, and then you just like run through a bunch of hands and kind of like drill that into your memory, or like especially when I'm playing, like if I had a spot where like I wasn't quite sure if I was supposed to open, I always just take a quick note and then make sure to check after the fact. I think it's a really great way, especially if you don't have like a ton of time to study. And then we also built an app called Poker OS, but is it really great if you're like just on the road, just like study on mobile, you could like just put in like, okay, 20 big blinds, auto practice from all positions, and I'll just like run you through a bunch as well. So what is this? And this just illustrates that like, okay, so button at 40 big blinds versus button at 100 big blinds, it widens up a bit. It's not like crazy amount, but like it does widen up a bit. We go from 51 to 56%. And then, yeah, so you see how that gets shallower. Okay, cool. I'll do a quick time check. Okay, like 15 minutes. Because I definitely want to get to this stuff, because I think this is where like population, these are like some population tendencies I notice a ton at like live tournaments, but the like kind of like 5 population tendencies or mistakes I really see people doing live is, one is like playing a linear range instead of a polar range, 3-betting range in late position versus early position open. What I mean by, so like polar is more like you're picking some bad stuff, you're picking some good stuff, and then you're like calling with a lot of the stuff like that's like kind of more in the middle. And there's a time and place for like having a linear 3-betting range versus a polar range, but I think there's a lot of players who kind of make this mistake where they're still 3-betting with a linear range when they're, especially against early position, where you're meant to be more polar. And I'll explain, we'll look at examples of this. Second is calling way too loose in multi-way pots. I lost like a huge like 200 big blind pot when I was playing at Trident 1 in Jeju, because I was calling too loose on the button after like under the gun opened, under gun 2 called. I had king 6 suited, which if it was just under the gun open, I think I'm calling with like king 5 suited plus. But then the actual range is supposed to be now, like especially when another person calls, it's supposed to be like king 9 suited plus. So I'm like shedding off those suited kings, and then I just got completely owned in that hand, in a hand that I was never supposed to be in the first place. Overfolding versus 3-bet, so I mentioned this one, and we'll look at what the shapes kind of look like and what hands you should be calling more that I think a lot of people are missing. Overfolding to short stack jams, because people don't realize what range it looks like for people to be jamming with like sub 20 big blinds, and then also conversely, because you don't know the range, not shoving wide enough when you have 20 big blinds, and especially from the blinds, like the small blind or the big blind versus a late position open. I see people miss a lot of the shoves that they should have. So these are kind of like the top 5. I'll cover some quick examples of each of these in the time that we have. So The very first one, so 3-bet ranges, so like we'll take, if we're the button versus early position open, so assume under the gun. Why did I write cutoff? Button versus under the gun? Oh, sorry, yes. So when we are button versus a late position open, and then we are button versus an early position open. So what percentage of hands, so let's say we're on the button, 60 big blinds effective, and the cutoff opens. What percentage of hands do you think we want to be 3-betting with?
I think 15, 20%.
15, 20%? Okay. Any other guesses? What do we think about cutoff's opening range? Do we think this is a wide range? Do we think this is a tight range? Yeah, it's like a 40% plus range. So what do we think, how does that dictate what hands that we want to 3-bet with? Are we like, or like, do we think our general 3-betting range is going to be wider or tighter compared to against like under the gun?
Wider.
Yes, yes. So generally our range is going to be wider because we're facing a 40% open. We're probably going to generate a ton of folds. So I think I heard like something around like 15, 20%. So conversely, what do you think that would be? If we think we're going to be now much tighter, especially at a shallower stack depth and then against under the gun, what do we think percentage of hands wise we want to be 3-betting?
I guess half of that.
5-10%.
5-10%, yeah, so around that range. Okay, so let's take a look. So you guys got the heuristic that you want to be half, which is really good, but generally is you're going to be a lot tighter than, so maybe you guys are probably 3-betting too many hands. If you're thinking you're maybe 3-betting like around 20% in both formations. But yeah, you can see how tight generally we want to be, especially versus the under the gun range. So yeah, this is kind of like what a 3-betting range will look like against kind of like a pretty wide open. Yeah.
Are they both 60 big blinds effective?
No. So this is it's 160 and 135, which I know is a bit confusing and not a direct comparison, but I wanted to highlight that to illustrate kind of like a little bit more of like just an extreme scenario. If this were 35 bigs, one, you start to also see some like actually maybe you don't see jams here at 35 bigs, but it would be a little tighter basically, probably something like 11% or like 10.5% at 35 bigs. But yes.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, the green just means call?
Yes.
And then red is the 3-bet?
Red is 3-bet, exactly, yeah. Yes, good question. Yeah.
On the right side, I see ace-jack off is more of a raise range than ace-queen suited. So I kind of wanted to understand why behind it.
Yeah, this is a great question. This exactly highlights one, like the strength of hands, but also like the polarity of our range against early position. So I think it's really important to notice like where do our 3-bets come from against early position. And the reason why we want to be this tight is because we found out that the under the gun range was, what did we say? It was something like it was like 19%. Right, but when you're shot, like depending on the stack size, it's like it's generally gonna be in that like 15 to like sub 20% range. So right, it's an incredibly strong range, which is why like you're seeing calls all the way up to like pocket jacks, which I think you probably don't see a lot in population, but I see like I got like also like fucked in a hand when I was playing in Australia at the AKWPT main event, and like I opened early position with ace king, a guy on the button, we're both relatively deep. He calls with pocket jacks. And like, I think it goes like check on the flop. He flopped a set. And then I hit like an ace on the turn, and then we end up getting it all in. So I was like, well, I don't know, he doesn't have sets here or whatever. I just had no idea that he could even have jacks in his range. And that's when I like started to really look at these, and I was like, wow, like how tight like the button is actually supposed to be playing, and they're flatting with like all of these hands. And I'd probably say like somebody wakes up with pocket jacks in the button against early position open, in your typical like low stakes live tournament, they're probably gonna be 3-betting it. Whereas like honestly in my own deviation, I'm actually like, I'm calling almost 100%. I shouldn't say 100%, it's very player dependent, but I call with a lot like jacks quite often, especially against players that I think would never put like that in my range. Like maybe less so against good players, and even sometimes with pocket queens depending on the stack depth. But the main reason, what I mean by that polar range is that like, you're still gonna be 3-betting like your really good stuff, like your aces through queens, your ace king suited. And then you're going to be 3-betting your junky stuff where like you get 4-bet, you're just going to like very quickly fold. I think Peter, you were asking like, why do you want to 3-bet with ace jack off, or like, why does ace 10 off 3-bet so often compared to ace queen suited? And it's just a function of like, ace queen suited just has a lot of equity, right? Like you kind of like don't want to 3-bet and then get 4-bet, and then you're kind of like hating life. Like you're like just going to be dominated by a lot of their hands that are kind of in their 4-betting range or like flipping. You're never really in a dominant situation. Whereas like ace 10 off is kind of like the bottom, like mostly when we're bluffing, this is something you'll see very common in solvers, is our bluffs come from our worst offsuit hands. So like what are our worst offsuit hands here? Ace 10 off is the bottom, king jack off, queen jack off. So those are our most classic bluffs. So if you think about like in a spot where like somebody raises and then you're deciding whether or not to call or 3-bet, like think about like what's the worst ace X that you would call with? Maybe you would call with ace jack off. Then you can use ace 10 off as your 3-bet bluff. So that's where they'll come from, and that's why you see a lot of this is like the bottom of our range, is all this offsuit stuff. And then it's always gonna mix sometimes with some of this like suited, like, you know, ace 4 suited, king 7 suited. When I see something like this, I usually simplify, and I just take like if you add up all of these shades of red, it kind of adds up to like one block. So I just say, I'm just gonna take like ace 6 suited, and that if I see ace 6 suited, that's my 3-bet bluff. Or if I see king 7 suited, that's my 3-bet bluff, and then I'm not gonna 3-bet bluff with like these other ones. But it's not a big deal, honestly, if you're missing some of these. I think frankly, it's more important that you recognize that like you can be calling with like some of this stuff that maybe you might be just always 3-betting. And then these are probably the more important bluffs that you'll wanna like pull from, is like your worst offsuit hands. And that heuristic is something you'll see in like every sort of chart shape. It's like the bluffs are very often pulled from like your worst offsuit, and then some of like your weak suited aces and kings suited things.
So let's say I have ace 10 off and I decide to 3-bet, but then you get 4-bet.
You fold. It's a bluff.
Okay.
When you're doing this, you know it's a bluff. You just instantly 4-bet. You just instantly fold. Which is why in this formation, like when you're 3-betting here, so like let's say under the gun makes it 2 big blinds, you make it 6 big blinds. The under the gun position player is, if they're steady, they should know that your range is really polar, meaning you're just gonna have like hands that are gonna be insta folds, or hands that are gonna be like 5-bet all in, or maybe call the trap with like aces. So their 4-bet sizing is usually gonna be very small or clicky. Like when you're 4-betting against a very polar range, you get to just like use really small sizings. And I got owned actually by my coach, Andrew Moreno. I was playing a hand with him, and like I had ace queen suited on the gun. He 3-bet me with kings on the button, and then sorry, no, I had ace queen off. So one, I chose to 4-bet bluff with it, which first you can kind of see that like it does it sometimes, but like it was almost like it was still slightly too good. Like I would be much happier to 4-bet bluff with like a hand like like a weaker. Oh, sorry, no. This is our 3-betting range. For our 4-betting range, like we wouldn't really be 4-betting with ace jack off, ace 10 off, or folding that. So ace queen off, king queen off are kind of like our bottom like 4-bet like bluffs. So I chose to do that, but I made it like 3.5x his size, which like it just doesn't really exist in theory land. And then like and I'm just like risking way too many chips, because when he's bluffing, like he's just gonna fold. Like if he has a hand like ace 10 off, he's just gonna fold anyways. I don't need to risk as many chips. So just something to keep in mind, because this is where like I've just torched chips, and then we end up getting all the money in, and then I got stacked by him, but a post flop. But anyways, yeah, you guys can learn from my mistakes. Any other questions on this one? Cool. But yeah, it just gives you an idea of kind of like what a polar range looks like, whereas this is more linear. Like you're gonna be 3-betting with some more of your value-driven stuff, like jacks, 10s. Like you've got some of this stuff, which is like a little more mergey. These aren't really like bluffs per se. But yeah, you'll have kind of like a mix, and you're adding in a bunch more, some suited stuff, some more offsuit stuff. So the second thing I mentioned, which was that people are playing way too loose in multi-way pots. And this is all derived from what we said in the very beginning of this, which was that you just can't really win a ton of EV playing multi-way. So it's really gonna tighten up your ranges. So I'll have you guys guess again, but button versus under the gun, what do you guys think for 40 big blinds effective? Actually, I think we looked at this. Maybe we looked at this one, but like what percentage of hands, or what percentage do you think we're beat pipping?
It's like 6%, 7%.
Oh, that's the key.
No, yeah, that was the 3-betting range. So this is gonna be wider, like, cause it includes calling, it includes raising. So if you have like a 6% 3-betting range, you're also gonna have like something. Well, I'll just say it just for the sake of time, but it's sorry, 15. It's around there. Yeah, I think it is actually like 15% calling range. So it's a 20%. Let's say it's around 20% VPIP. How do you guys think that gets impacted once you have under the gun one who calls? So under the gun opens, under the gun one calls, and now we're on the button. First, do you guys think we're tighter or tighter? Okay, yes.
3 or 4% tighter.
3 or 4% tighter. So you think if it was 20%, then it would go down to
Down to
like
like
17%.
17, 15, something like that.
Yeah. So let's take a look. So if this will grow. Okay, there we go. So I think we said like something like 20%. Yeah. So it's 23%. So 6% raise, 17% call, 23% there, versus 15% here. So you can see like the raise, the hands that we want to raise with, it doesn't drop dramatically. It's kind of like a marginal movement, but you can see we're gonna have some more jams here. But our calling range is almost halved, right? From that to that, just by under the gun one calling, which is very significant. So I mentioned here, like, this is the exact hand like I called with against under the gun. I had king 6 suited. I knew pretty confidently that I can call with this hand. And like, look how like now I'm like 4 pips off in this one. So I was just like, this wasn't even close. This is like a complete blunder that I called with this hand, and I lost my whole stack in that hand. So this is like really, really important and will get you out of a lot of trouble, especially in multi-way pots, when you just think that like, just know that you're going to be a lot tighter when it's a raise and a call. Yeah, especially with the hands that you're going to be calling with. Any questions on this? No? Okay. Next one, big blind. I think this is the same thing, but just illustrates like the big blind range. So it's if button opens versus.
You're just adding the extra.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry. So this is wrong. Let's just say button versus big blind. So when button opens. Wait, sorry. Hold on. This is button versus under the gun.
That's big.
No, this should be under the gun versus big blind. I think that's what this is. This is under the gun. Yeah, sorry. This is under the gun versus big blind. So you're calling with 63% of hands, raising with 5%, and this is big blind versus under the gun one. Under the gun opens. Under the gun one calls. Under the gun two also calls. And look at our range. How much it gets like decimated. Like literally like. 80% of the hands that we were supposed to call with gets shutted here, and most players will think that like, oh, I got like great pots, right? Like there's so much like dead money in the pot, and I only need to put 1 big blind more. But first off, like I took a really extreme scenario because these ranges all need to be like super tight. Like under the gun range is tight because he's tight. This range is like quite tight to be calling. This person also has to be really tight to call, as we saw. Like illustrated by that from the last chart, like once you have 1 caller. So these 3 ranges are all like super strong. So that's why like our calling range is like significantly reduced. But this is like kind of the most extreme example of how much our calling range gets decreased because of the multi-wayness. Okay, defending versus 3 bets. So last 2 things, defending versus 3 bets. So if we're in the low jack, we open versus button who 3 bets, 40 big blinds effective. What percentage of hands do you guys think that we need to be calling with, and where do you think those calls come from? Like what parts of the chart? And calling not 4 betting.
Pocket pairs.
Pocket pairs, yeah. Suited connectors. And you want to guess at how many, what percentage of hands? What percentage of hands that we opened with, specifically? So not what percentage of total hands, but like if we opened, let's say in this case, low jack, something like a 38% range or something like that, 35% range. What percentage of those hands do we think we're continuing with?
Both raise and call, or just?
Yeah, chart. Yeah, both raise and call. You can make total VPIP. Yeah.
65%.
65%. 40%. Any other guesses?
80.
80%. Okay? Okay, so somewhere between 40 and 80%. All right, so let's take a look. So it is, what is this, 70%. Am I getting the math right? Yeah, 68%, so 70%. You are continuing 70%. So it just shows that like, you're continuing a lot, right? Like, and I would say people are probably really under defending. Like most of your calls are coming from, like you're almost not really folding a suited hand. If you open with a suited hand, you're not really folding on, except for like some of this garbage stuff, like your bottom queen X suited, some of your bottom king X suited. You're calling with every suited connector, which people mentioned. You're basically calling or raising with every pocket pair. Most of your folds really come from like your offsuit stuff. Like definitely much happier to call with a hand like 10-8 suited than I am like even king jack off, which kind of feels unintuitive because you've got like two high cards, but just the suitedness is just going to have much more playability. And just remember that like if you just remember one thing, which is like when you're playing 3-bet pots, you generally you're generally going to fold all your offsuit stuff or use some of them as bluffs. But you don't really want to be calling and playing out of position 3-bet pots with any of your offsuit stuff.
How does this change when you're like 100 or like 60 big blinds?
Versus, what are we here, 40 big blinds? It'll be similar. It'll be quite similar. Like it might not be, when you're deeper, I would say you're probably going to be defending, I mean, you're opening wider. It's probably still going to be around 70%, because 70% is quite large already. It's going to look similar, yeah. You might have more 3-bets when you're deeper. Sorry, 4-bets, I guess. Yeah, that's a good question. I'll take a look at that after. Oops. Okay, this is the last one. I think just one last chart, but basically, I mentioned that like a lot of people are really kind of like understudying and misapply like what percentage and how many hands they're supposed to be jamming with, especially sub 20 bigs. So in this scenario, we're in the small blind. The button opened, and we're 20 big blinds effective. What percentage of hands in someone who didn't see what the answer was, but take a guess at like what percentage of hands do you think we are going to be V-pipping with, whether calling or raising or all in, and bonus points if you can break it down between those three. Let's start with overall V-pip.
I think 15%.
15%, okay. Any other guesses? Whoever gets the closest on this last question will also get a poker wise. So add some incentive.
22.
You already have 22%?
Yeah.
Okay, 22%. Sorry, Angad, you said 15%.
22.1.
19.5.
19.5%. 25%.
$1.
$1. Okay. And then bonus point. Yes.
Let's say 18.4%, and it's almost all jams.
Okay. Does anyone who answered think it's anything different from almost all jams?
I think it's only like 25% jams at 20 big blinds.
Okay. So
I mean,
you
like,
think it's
if we're-
25% total V-pip, and you think it's all jams?
Yeah, if it's at 20 big blinds. If it's at 10, it's 100% jam. But if it's at 20, I think it's only like 25% jam.
Oh, so you think 25% of the hands that you're V-pipping are jams,
Yeah,
and then the
so
other
like-
75% are
So if we're
calls?
looking at 18%, then it's going to be
Like 5% or something.
6%.
And what are you doing with the rest? Calling or raising?
It's either call or jam.
Okay, so calling with whatever 15% or 13%, and
There's
then
no
raising is jamming.
raise. It's
Okay.
either call or jam.
Cool. Any last guesses for the hat?
Certain ranges from the
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
it's a little bit. Oh, sorry.
You already guessed 22%.
No, I didn't want to change it. I was just
You think it's higher than 25%
Yeah.
of total V-pip? Peter, your guess?
40% of the hands that I'm going with is gonna be the jam.
Okay. Okay. I hope you guys remembered your answers because I don't remember all of them. But we're gonna see the answer, which is suspense. Okay, so it's almost all jams. So people who said 40% or 25% jam, just know that it's almost entirely jams. And I think someone said 25%, but nobody actually guessed. Was that Brody, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think you were the closest, so you get the hat. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But yeah, so this is a 28% VPIP, which is quite high, and as I mentioned, like I think the population tendency is definitely under VPIPing here and under jamming. And consequently, because people are under jamming, when you get 3-bet jammed on and you're in the button, people are under calling. They're not calling enough when they're shoving every like low ace-x, like calling with a hand like a7 starts to become kind of appealing because you're dominating all of this like ace6, ace to ace3, all of this stuff. You're flipping against a lot of these like bottom pairs. I mean, yeah, and then you're kind of like flipping with like a bunch of this stuff as well. So you're not dominated that often. Yeah.
I'm curious if you think in a live setting implementing the non-all-in 3-bet is like worth, like, cause only like doing a non-all-in 3-bet with exactly aces and like queen 9 suited and whatever, is that like something that you actually implemented in this?
I do, yeah. So in a lot of scenarios, you'll take like, it's usually exactly aces. It's usually exactly aces that's going to, like for example, when you're at 15 bigs and like somebody opens and you mostly just have 3-bet jams, but like I'll still have like a size of like 4.5 big blinds with exactly aces. Aces and then like your worst, so instead, in this case, instead of like your worst offsuit stuff, which I guess you still have that happening here, but then it's largely gonna come from like, honestly you just need to pick one, right? Like just pick one of these and it's like, okay, I'm gonna do queen 9 suited or aces. In that spot, it's not a big deal if you simplify and just be like, forget, I'm not gonna have any like not all in 3-bets with aces. Like I'm just gonna like jam all of this stuff and then cut your queen 9 suited. It's simpler strategy, but I do personally do this, yes, with hands like aces.
I guess I was calling way too often when I was 20 big and less.
Calling too often when somebody
Yeah,
jams. Oh, you mean call like you'll
calling too light.
Oh, like you'll
I
just
was-
call with this hand
like
instead
a
of jamming.
5-6 suited, like 7-8 suited.
Yeah.
I would always call there, but
Right.
maybe that was one of my big weaknesses.
Yes. Because that remember how we said when you get shallower, like the EV of like suited connectors goes way down. Because like you're just gonna get it in and just like you're never like it really comes as a function of like how often are you dominated versus how many hands are you dominating in their range. And when you have these like suited connectors, you're like literally you're like never dominating them. Whereas I mentioned when you have a hand like a7, like you're calling in the button, you're like dominating a lot of this stuff.
I get that aces and maybe queen jack suited, they could call, but I'm just wondering why a king 8 suited and king 7 suited is a call.
It just
versus a shove or fold.
It just needs to balance like, because it just knows that like if you start to build a calling range here with our aces, like it's gonna need to balance with some of this stuff, and it just like pulls from like some random areas. Like I would just say like don't really pay attention to it too much. I just fold this stuff frankly. Like I don't try to build a calling range at all here. I just have a shove or like a small 3-bet.
Okay.
And then I might like just pure 3-bet with my aces. Maybe have it do with my kings half the time, and then I'll choose like king 8 suited and queen 9 suited as like my 3-bet bluffs, like at some frequency. Okay, cool. Okay, I think we ran over. Oh yeah, we're running about 10 minutes. But that, I'll wrap it up there. Thanks guys. Hope to see you. Really great pre-flop.
I think it's really interesting that you said the population tendency doesn't call enough 3-bets. What